Kenya Revenue Authority has a message for you. It says you can actually just register for e-teams. This is for those who are not VAT registered, who do not have a VAT obligation. It's okay. You can still generate a tax invoice, and that will be linked to the Kenya Revenue Authority. It's called e-teams, Electronic Tax Invoice Management System. How do you do that? Just go to ecitizen.kra.go.ke. You will log into the system just like you log into your eCitizen platform. It'll ask you for your ID. You'll put in your password, and then you log in. And once you get there, you'll be on the KRA platform. From there, just go in, say, sign up for e-teams. You sign up. If you already have an e-teams and you want to generate an invoice, you just go and drop down menu, invoice. Generate an invoice. The information that you will need to generate an invoice, very, very simple. The PIN number of the person or entity that you're invoicing. That's it. It'll now come and tell you, okay, so this is P number 00000K. Okay, that is Habitat for Humanity Kenya. And you'll say, yes. I don't know how it's registered in KRA. Is it Habitat for Humanity Kenya?
Yes, it is.
That's how it's known by KRA.
Exactly.
Okay, Habitat for Humanity Kenya. Just say, yes, this is the institution. And then you'll put in the details. This is an invoice for XYZ services, communication services. Habitat for Humanity Kenya. Okay, the amount, X. The frequency, how many times did you do this, X. And then the total. It puts in the total. Once you say generate the invoice, simple, nice, beautiful invoice generated, you can just click email them. It goes straight to info@Habitat for Humanity, or you can download it and then you send it, or you print it and take it hard copy, or however you've agreed with Habitat that you're sending an invoice. So it's simple, right? It's just 1, 2, 3, go. ecitizen.kra.go.ke. This is a long weekend. It's cold in many parts of the country. You want to stay indoors with a blanket and a tablet or a TV or a phone or whatever. Just watch something, consume some content.
Indeed. And you can find the ultimate entertainment experience as you look. And you don't have to look much further than Showmax. It's the upgraded streaming platform for Africa, where you can find all your great series, your movies, your live football, Premier League to be specific, all of that for as little as 300 shillings a month. So what do you need to do? You need to download the Showmax app, first of all, or you can visit the website www.showmax.com, find out all this great entertainment that's available, and then you can get on it. So imagine if they decide that power is going to go off, download it now while you have access to that, and then you can come in and watch it later. That's the great thing. And on different devices, mobiles, phone, tablet, laptop, television, whatever it may be, and that you can actually have entertainment on the go. Showmax, Shika, Showmax.
Kabisa, kabisa. Now we're going to have a next conversation. Hey, what's happened to my phone now? It has just decided it's going to do like that. Okay. Our next conversation is going to be about housing. Now, we've talked about housing for a number of years now in this country, okay? In fact, housing has come to the fore, which is a very good thing for our next guests, because housing now is front and center, and that's what they've been doing across the globe. What is a home? What's a house? People have been asking, Nani amelala nje? How many people have not slept in a house? Okay, and then we come into start getting granular. What do we mean by a house? There's something called a decent house. What's a decent house? There's something called an affordable house. What's an affordable house? And that's why we have our two guests who are joining us. They are from Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity International, and then the local side, the Habitat for Humanity Kenya. Let's start with International. Patrick Canagasingham, right?
Got it right, yes.
Patrick Canagasingham. He is the global COO, that's the Chief Operating Officer for Habitat for Humanity International, and Anthony Stephen Okoth is the National Director at Habitat for Humanity Kenya. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seats of the Situation Room.
Great.
And thank you very much for joining us. You both look warm. I love your jacket and I love your hoodie. I don't know which one I want.
It's pretty cold out there.
I want both.
And it wasn't planned, by the way.
Yeah. It wasn't planned.
It wasn't planned.
It's just coincidental.
Yeah.
We just decided to be on brand.
Yeah, we decided to brand ourselves.
Very good.
Thank you.
You are on brand. City, why don't you give them the proper brand of the Situation Room?
Yes. We have proverbs from this continent every single day. And our proverb from this week comes from an East African country, East African coast. It has neighbors, Somalia, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania,
South Sudan.
South Sudan. Oh, yes. And the Indian Ocean. The name of the country begins with a K.
Can I take a guess?
Yes.
Kenya?
Likewise.
Okay. The two of you clearly understand the country you're in.
Oh, yes. No doubt.
The proverb for the day. This is our final proverb for this week from the country of Kenya, the Republic of Kenya. All monkeys cannot hang on the same branch.
All monkeys cannot hang on the same branch. Anthony, I want to start with you. What's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, that's interesting because it is true that all monkeys can't hang on the same branch. You know, it says, basically from my perspective, I think we are not equal in the sense. We will more or less have different coats to fit different sizes. But again, just to mention that we all can't be clamped into one room and we all can't be contextualized to have the same standards and more so with the discussions today, I believe it's more or less similar because we all can't just have the same set of standards. And again, it is true that all monkeys can't fit the same branch.
Patrick, what's your global view of this?
The global view for me, and I sure hope there aren't any wrong answers, is that I want to build on my colleague Anthony's interpretation and say, yeah, it's not one size fits all, and I think we got to respect the diversity of who we are.
Great. Siti?
You see, these two gentlemen speak from a position of knowledge. Not many people on this planet have actually had the opportunity and pleasure of actually seeing monkeys in their habitat. When you have, the first thing that comes to mind is when you listen to the proverb, you think of when you last saw these primates and what they were doing, and you realize, yeah, perhaps when you find many of them in a particular branch, there's a reason why. Probably what they sought to eat is found in abundance.
Oh, it's the only branch.
Or it's the only branch that is there, yes. But by and large, the habitat that primates inhabit are shrubbery, trees, forests, and you'll find them all over the place. But that is when they have choices. When there are more trees, you'll find them all over the trees. Yes.
So, Patrick, whenever people talk about habitat for humanity, many people go straight into UN habitats, and they confuse the two. So, distinguish them for us.
Happy to distinguish, although I have to say that we work very closely with UN Habitat. We consider them to be a critical partner, and we do work close enough to co-create some of the solutions. There is also a distinction, though, and if you don't mind, I could just take us back historically as to how we started. I just want to take us back to rural Georgia in a place called Koinonia. We came out of a farm, and we came out of a...
Georgia, Russia, Georgia, US.
Sorry, Georgia, US.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you for that clarification. And the reason I like to talk about our history is that history inspired me to join Habitat. It came out during the height of racial segregation in the United States when Clarence Jordan, a minister, a Baptist minister, decided that he was going to invite black farmers into his community and pay them equal wages. It was radical at that time, and he paid a price. There were consequences for him. But what that taught us is that courage, boldness, and conviction are critical aspects for us to pursue. And that movement became Habitat for Humanity in 1976. Again, with that mindset of a grassroots organization predicated on serving and reaching out to communities. We work in 70 countries across the globe, and we also work in the United States as well, in all 50 states. What Habitat has done traditionally is to really engage, that's how we started, volunteers with our communities. You're probably aware that we have hundreds and thousands, I'm inclined to say close to about 1 million volunteers across the globe. And that connection and the roots of that relationship has really helped inspire us to look at housing in a way Clarence Jordan inspired us with boldness. So the distinction for me when I think of UN Habitat, which is a United Nations agency also working on similar issues with us as a civil society organization, is that we help all our partners, including UN Habitat, to bring our communities closer to the solutions that we are seeking, because we have a gigantic problem. 2.8 billion people around the world don't have access to adequate housing, and we need more partners. UN Habitat is not the only partner, but a critical partner.
So what do? You build homes for people for free?
We do a combination of things. We build homes, we advocate on behalf of our communities, either through our advocacy efforts, through policy discourse. We make sure that we engage our volunteers, we mobilize volunteers to work with our communities as well. And we also fundraise, and part of the fundraising efforts includes giving supporters an opportunity to be closer to the issues that they are supporting.
I see. So when you say there are billions of people in the world who don't have access to housing, what do we mean?
The definition here is social housing. So there are 2.8 billion people, according to the United Nations, who don't have access to adequate housing. Of the 2.8 billion, about a little over a billion actually live in what we call informal settlements or slums across the globe. So that is the real definition of people not having access to adequate housing. And the definition, again, is social housing.
Okay. So what is adequate housing?
It's a decent, safe place. So if you think of an informal settlement or a slum, people might say technically, well, but they have a dwelling. But that dwelling may not be safe. Probably that dwelling causes other types of issues like health-related issues. That dwelling may not be adequate for a child to go to school. That dwelling may actually not provide an opportunity for people to work. So what we say when we say adequate housing and decent housing, it's the opportunity to, the livability, or the habitability, as we call it, is a critical part of it.
Is this a UN definition? Is there like a global definition for what is decent and affordable housing? Let's start with decent housing. What's a decent house? Is there a uniform definition for this?
There is a uniform definition around what we call habitability.
Okay.
So that's what I explained earlier. The definition is also by context as well, because I had the opportunity and the privilege to visit different parts of the world, and I can assure you, I've seen it all. There could be a house that's very modest, and that modesty is important in that particular context. But that modesty may not be as relevant, or even, quite frankly, from a habitability standpoint, might be a challenge in another part of the world. So there is a local context to the global context.
Yes, yeah.
What would it look like if we do, domesticate the conversation? What would decent housing look like in Kenya, for example?
Yeah.
What would have to be present in a decent settlement that we would, or in a settlement whereby you would now say it's decent?
Well, thank you very much. And allow me first to start by expressing my condolences first to the Kenyans who lost their lives in this season that we even have a holiday today, because I'm sure we stand alongside with them and express our sincere condolences and stand alongside them in this season. But just to come back to your question, Duke, basically in Kenya, it is actually culturally sensitive. It's culturally specific, because you might find there's some communities where a 1 or 2 bedroom house is not culturally sensitive, because you might find in some cultures you'll find a 2 bedroom is ideal. Others you'll find a 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom with an more or less an external amenities will be decent. So for us as Habitat, what we have done, Habitat for Humanity in Kenya, what we have done is that we've worked across to try and identify what's the ideal space. And so part of the units that we work with here in Kenya is approximately 33 square meters, which is actually a 2 bedroom house, and actually then has a small sort of like living room and a store, and then externally they have toilets and bathrooms which are actually segregated. And so for us, for an ideal setup, it's actually a house that will actually give you the comfort of coming in. If there's that cultural aspects of daughters cannot spend in the same room with the parents, we actually take that into context as we factor that in. And so it'll actually vary from community to community, but in ideal situations in Kenya, they look at a social housing, look at anything between 33 square meters to 50 square meters in terms of size.
And what about the building materials?
Yeah. One of the good things about what we do as Habitat for Humanity, when you look at building materials, we actually try to contextualize it to the locality in which we build. You'll find that in some situations, for example in Western, you'll find that we have actually worked with communities to look at materials that are conducive around that area. So in some cases, in the past, they used to have bricks that they'd actually more or less brick. They'll heat it up and actually use that as more or less stone. But actually, we are now working with institutions, especially universities and researchers, to actually come up with newer technologies, such as stabilizing salt blocks, that actually tends to, again, reduce that aspect of burning bricks to increase the carbon footprint. And so as Habitat, what we'll do, just to answer your question, CT, we look at materials that are conducive to the various different localities. So one, we can either use stone, we can either use stabilizing soil stabilizing blocks. We can also use other materials such as what we call injectable concrete forms. That is a form of styrofoam that actually helps to more or less substitute reduce the amount of stones that we use. And so in a nutshell, as Habitat, what we just take a step back and say, when we talk of building materials, we will look at the context in which we are building the homes and actually contextualize it to that setup.
Then comes a discussion of affordability.
Exactly.
Because if you're saying you're using readily available materials, good. But the process that you speak of will add a cost to it. How then do you factor the capacity of the individual? Because I'm taking the point of view that the bulk of our population is actually in the rural areas.
True.
Okay?
True.
So I'm looking at a very sensible approach that you have of using materials that are local to ensure that somebody builds some decent dwelling. Now, what is it that you do to ensure that all the factors that go into building this particular house, you mentioned material, yes. You said it's localized, yes, we understand. You've taken in the cultural context, okay. Cost, what do you do?
Costs is definitely something that we look into as Habitat for Humanity, because for one, and you look at the context of social housing, one of the things that we look at, most of the people who have access to social housing are people who live in less than $2 a day. And if you look at the definition of social housing in Kenya, these are people who literally in a month do not earn more than 6,000. Shillings in a month. And so as we look at housing and as we look at the context, we try and ensure that most of the houses that we build can actually suit these individuals. A case in point here. For example, if we were to go in and look at, for example, some of the housings that we factored into the communities that we engaged in, what's very important for us is to ensure that first and foremost, it actually meets the regulatory requirements, which is very critical. And two, we're using the locally available material so that you actually reduce the cost of transportation of materials into the area. What does that mean in terms of costing? Basically, for most of the social housings that we construct, will be anything between 600,000 to 800,000 shillings, a complete unit of 2-bedroom of 33 square meters. Yeah, just to put numbers to whatever. What does that translate to? I know you might say, well, with somebody who is earning 3,000, how would they be able to afford that? You know? But just to have context, we actually want to say that helps us to ensure that we navigate within the different parameters to factor in the prices.
Where I'm going,
I see the smile.
I'm smiling, but where I'm going with my question is because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of, say, the way people build houses in my neck of the woods.
Yes.
And how much it actually costs. And I'm looking at houses that are built for relatives and how much it has cost.
Yeah.
What the frame is. That house is built in 2 days.
Exactly.
Okay? Literally. Wood, some bamboo, you structure it.
Yeah.
The only time you use a lot of wood is when you're putting up the roofing. Okay? Then the rest is a mixture of mud, sand. Okay?
Yeah.
At the end of it, when it's dried, they'll use cement to sort of like smoothen it.
Plaster.
To plaster it.
Plaster. That is the word. Okay? And somebody has a house that they are happy with. Okay? And I'm looking at traditional housing before the iron sheets came into being, which were grass thatched, what have you. Now, why am I going in this direction? I'm saying what you've just told me makes a great deal of sense. But if you do what you do, the how, is it you as the organization, or is it you and the community at large? Because if the community is part and parcel of the process, then very many things will work with a lot more ease, and the cost element will be that much more reduced.
Very well said, City. And actually, our mantra as Habitat for Humanity is to ensure that we don't build as Habitat. First and foremost, we work with building capacity of the communities that we actually engage with, our local partners. In fact, most people will say beneficiaries, but we say they are partners, because in most cases, we are working alongside with them to first and foremost build their capacity, and as we then use them to now become the ones who do the construction themselves. Because our mantra as Habitat for Humanity is to ensure that as we go into the community, we are going there recognizing that we are just equipping them with the skill sets and the tools, and they thereafter go and use those skill sets and tools to actually equip other homes. What we do in terms of our volunteers, we ensure that as we engage the local community, first and foremost, they're the ones who will identify those people who will actually build for. They're the ones who come together as a community and help in terms of the construction. And so a lot of the labor comes from the community. A lot of the thought process and a lot of the materials come from the community, and hence that is how we're able to reduce the cost of our housings.
We are talking about decent, affordable housing. What does it mean from a global context, from a Kenyan context? Patrick Canagasingham is the Group Chief Operating Officer at Habitat for Humanity International, and Anthony Stephen Okoth is the National Director for Habitat for Humanity Kenya. If I just see if I got it right, Patrick. So as Habitat for Humanity, what you do is you mobilize resources, you mobilize volunteers who will come in and give either knowledge, skill, material resources, financial resources. You mobilize a community that will give you the knowledge of who needs a house. You also mobilize a community to come in and offer support in putting up decent, affordable houses for people. True?
That's very true, and I think you summed it up so well. I mean, you pretty much summed up the housing value chain of all the critical stakeholders.
Where is the government?
The government is critical. I like the way my colleague Anthony, gave perspective from a Kenyan standpoint. And if I may use Kenya as an example, since I'm here, it's typical for us to work with the government and through the government, but not only the government. The government is a partner. The government, in essence, pretty much, if I may, no pun intended, but holds the keys, so to speak, in terms of when it comes to the housing agenda. And I am so inspired when I travel around the world and see how governments are so engaged. They all see housing as a critical priority, a social issue, and across the globe, every country where we have footprint, it's not unusual for us to have a formal partnership agreement, whether it's at the national level or at the local level with government.
Okay. Are there countries that you have, traveled and worked as Habitat for Humanity International, where you find government policies and programs are actually making it easier for people to access homes, where the job of Habitat for Humanity maybe is just coming in at last mile?
Definitely, the short answer is yes, and yet you would appreciate when we think about the global housing deficit, there's always room to do more. A critical part of the work that we do is to partner with the government and, as needed, create more awareness, but also to learn from the government in terms of what they have to share with us. creating awareness with the government is an opportunity we have through even global campaigns. So when I talked about informal settlements, I said there are 1 billion people who live around the world. And we work with governments across the globe, but with targeted governments as well, to say, listen, this is a big problem, and you have a bigger role to play than you think it is. And our urge and our exhortation is, please work with us, but not only through us, to ensure that you're not just creating awareness, but you're using your voice. Think of the G7, think of the G20 or the G77, for example. There are tremendous opportunities that we are leveraging right now, particularly in the context of informal settlements through a campaign called Home Equals. And that's just one example to illustrate how we can engage and actually encourage governments to do more.
What would you say is the more for governments to do? Because usually there is a battle for resources at any government level, and at the very least certain things should be there should be a certain thing that should be the very basic, right? So what would be the counter, or what would be the encouragement to the governments who say, well, you know what, I have so many things that I have to do, and here you are saying that everybody in the country then should have 1, 2, 3. What would then be the way out for that?
From a government standpoint? For the government?
The government to take.
So, but what we do is, without just calling out the problem statement, we come up with propositions, or we are eager to offer creative solutions where we can co-create with the government. I'll give you one example. Just a couple of years ago, I was in El Salvador in Central America. We had built 50,000 homes in 30 years. That was a remarkable achievement by any stretch. Only to be told that close to 80% of Salvadorians don't have access to adequate housing. So because we built homes, and that's critical, we build so that we can also influence and work with governments and other stakeholders. Because we had built so many homes, we had access to talk to the Minister of Housing. The conversation was something like this, for us to say, we love the fact that we have an opportunity to build in your country, work with our staff, with our supporters locally to do this. And yet, is there an opportunity for us to look at your national housing policy? That is the do more part for us, to say, how can we help you, and how can you help us through your national housing policy? And the invitation from the Minister of Housing at that point was to say, can you give us more input? And the same in Cambodia, a different part of the world. And they look for this kind of technical assistance based on our global footprint, to say, we don't pretend that we have all the answers, but because our posture is to learn and to work with and through partners, they're very open to the idea. So for me, the do more part is to say, can we do more than what you're currently doing, even in the form of investments? If I can just use one more example, and this is at a local government level in Honduras. Our national organization in Honduras did a tremendous job advocating with the local government to actually strengthen their policy around housing. Because the local government was able to do it so successfully, the national government, as part of their in terms of the budget transfer to their decentralized budget, actually almost doubled or tripled the amount of investments when it came to housing. So for us, that's the do more part.
So there's a lot of advocacy at that national, international level, right?
Maybe just to mention that even at the subnational level, just to give an example, for example, over the last 3 years, we've done almost 100 social homes in Laikipia. And part of the things that we have done alongside them is come up with an MOU, and part of the MOU actually encompasses the Laikipia County government coming in and actually even saying, for you people, when you're focusing on social housing, we will waive up some costs, we'll actually even give some land, we'll actually help you work to ensure that the basic infrastructure, even like, for example, the basic things like water, looking at the sanitation, is well taken care of. And so in most cases, when you say do more, we are working alongside with the government maybe to put up the social houses, but there we are working alongside also them to identify infrastructure opportunities that then are meant to then factor in to ensure that there's a settlement-based practice going forward.
Anthony, which is bigger? Your engagement with government and starting from that government to community, or your engagement with community and then bringing in the government later. Which one do you do more?
I think for us it's striking a balance. The reason is that for us, we serve the community and we actually come up with a lot of human-centered solutions which are drawn from the community up. But again, ensuring that as we engage the community, we are working with the government to ensure that the policies and the frameworks to create the enabling environment are well in place. Okay. And so I'll say it's a balance of both the two.
Okay, so let me just ask the direct question.
Yes.
Right now, government's big plan, big four in the previous government, housing is big, right? Yeah. What has been the involvement and the level of involvement of Habitat for Humanity, Kenya and the international? At county level, CIDPs, every 5 years we have a county integrated development plan. Are you involved in engaging the communities so that the issue of housing is put in the CIDP?
Yes. I'd actually boldly say yes, because we do it in using a two-pronged approach. One is we sit at the table when the discussions are happening, and we actually contribute towards a lot of the documents that are being developed. And then two, we actually encourage to get part of the local partners, the communities, on the table to actually voice their sentiments. Part of what we do with the Home Equals campaign, especially, is to work with communities and get the communities to sit at the table so that their voice is also heard before the government and they actually can contribute towards a lot of the documents that are happening. A good case in point, it's a bit controversial, I know right now, part of what we have been engaging as Habitat for Humanity is getting the team using partners, other partners, Akiba Mashinani. We've been sitting with them in Mukuru Kwanjenga and getting those communities to actually sit in front of government and actually speak and be part of the solutions that are being crafted in terms of the affordable housing agenda. So I'd say it's a two-pronged approach where we can directly engage and we sit at the table as Habitat for Humanity. And secondly, we also work with the communities, the local partners, to bring them at the table so that their voice is also part of the conversation. I'm sure you'll recall during the last Devolution conference that happened in Homa Bay, we had the privilege of taking some of the communities that we work with here into the Devolution conference and get their voice heard in terms of speaking, especially in forums that we had around the housing and affordable housing agenda.
What's currently going on in Kenya? And I'll ask both of you, but I want to start with Patrick because you are at the level where you're not so locally, politically involved. You could say so. Currently in Kenya, there is the housing and affordable housing program being rolled out by government. All right, identify land. So there you have waived the cost of land because this is using public land. And then coming up with incentives and saying, so let's bring in the private sector. We're going to waive VAT. We're going to waive some of these duties on the cost of materials that are being used. So we try and bring down the cost of housing and then identifying those that are going to be able to take up these houses. This is the program as it's going, all right? I know you've engaged with other countries. You've also engaged with Kenya at this particular point. Would like to hear your views on this. What is, in your opinion, working and good, and what, in your opinion, could be a red flag that needs maybe to be looked at and reviewed by government?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and again, I think context matters as well. I like the way my colleague Anthony, when your previous question, used the term, it's not an either-or, is what he said when you asked sequentially, between government and the community. And I would pretty much say the same thing when we use terms like affordable housing, social housing. Context really matters. Now, bear in mind, for us as a global organization, we also work in the United States as well. And the crisis in the United States is affordability. So affordable housing and solutions related to affordability is a big part of the local context. So one of the things that we do is to work with financial institutions, but also with developers. Because if the developers are not part of that value chain, we cannot attain the scale to solve the problem. Internationally, what I would say is this. 10 years ago, we introduced Microbill. It was a wholesale microfinance fund, and it was really to provide access to the most marginalized communities who cannot access formal financial institutions. Why? They need just not to buy homes, but they need to repair homes as well. And they cannot go and find an off-the-shelf product. And what we did was we worked through financial intermediaries, primarily microfinance institutions, to provide just not the financial assistance, but also the technical assistance. I'm happy to say, because we brought the private sector in, we brought financial institutions in, and several other investors, we were able to leverage a $100 million fund and catalyze it to the value of about $1 billion over a 10-year period, and reached more than 1 million people in 33 countries. It was so successful that we are now looking at the second phase of it. And again, we are working with development finance institutions, investors. Now, why am I sharing this is to say, when you look at the gigantic nature of the problem that we are trying to solve, be it you asked questions about the government, be it the government, be it the private sector, including developers, but also investors, but also to Anthony's point about our local communities, we call it the P4 approach, people, public, private, because all three are as important when it comes to the housing value chain if we are to really be successful in both building but also influencing the systems that's causing the housing deficit.
But I'd like to stress on something, Eric, because one thing I just want to bring to highlight is that we recognize that the government has focused on the affordable housing within the urban space. The biggest gap still remains at the rural context. And for us as Habitat, that's the space that we focused. I'm sure all of us will relate to the fact that within our community and within our backyard, there's that one relative of ours who is impoverished, who doesn't have some form of income, but has a land somewhere, you know, and they don't actually have that space to occupy, and they don't have anything to put up. So for us as Habitat for Humanity, our primary focus is to see how do we engage primarily within the rural context, the rural setup, to ensure that, especially for those who we say are not in the bracket of even purchasing a home or even affording a home, how do we actually work with our mechanisms, first to gather people around, to galvanize resources, and actually ensure that we empower them. We actually get them out of that cycle. And basically, by ensuring that we are then not necessarily only focusing on the urban agenda, which is also part of our key agenda for us, we've primarily focused on showing that how do we elevate most of the people who are impoverished, especially in the rural context, and more so with the fact that, again, most of the drivers in terms of migration pressures rural-urban migration, because they're trying to look for something to do. So for us, we say, how do we mitigate that? How do we ensure that we can create some form of livelihood, some form of settlement, some form of security, some form of hope to those people within the rural context?
So they can stay there.
So that they can stay there.
Okay. In the urban sites, on the urban sites, what the government is rolling out now in the affordable housing program, looking at all the various aspects of it, right? And it's very controversial right now in the country. But maybe there's some things that you see and you look at and you say, okay, here the government is onto something good. And here the government is onto something good, but maybe the approach what would advise to be different. You can list those.
To be frank, I think for us, our passion as Habitat for Humanity is that everybody deserves a decent place to live. And so we would not want to be in that space where we say this is wrong or right in terms of framework.
Right.
Yes. True. But for us, the truth of the matter is we're excited that people are having to access homes and actually able to get homes. I think for us is the people who deserve those homes, will they actually end up getting those homes? You know, in the sense of most of you have experience even with Nyayo High Rise. Nyayo High Rise was meant for a certain target group, but who ended up owning those spaces. And so I think for us it's just creating the right frameworks so that the people who we set out to achieve those products actually end up getting them.
How would you do it to make sure that the rightful beneficiaries end up in those homes? If you talk about just the social housing program of the government, right, which is where you focus on, what would be the things that you think should be very important to make sure that the deserving people end up being the beneficiaries of the social housing scheme by the government?
One of the good things is that if you look at the definition for those who would benefit for the social housing in Kenya, again, as earlier said, the government has defined for those who earn less than 3,000 or 6,000 combined will be the ones who actually get access to the social housing. And what is critical is ensuring that I know the Social Affairs has a list of how they've graduated and actually how they have classified different individuals, and hence some, when they're doing even the cash transfers, people, they use that even as a framework. I think for me what's important is recognizing that using the same framework without duplicating and having a separate one to actually identify those who will then benefit as part of that. But I think for me what is critical is recognizing that even as you do an allocation, is recognizing first there's a community that existed within that space. Mm-hmm. How do you take care of ensuring that those communities are not displaced but are also integrated into the solution? And so for me, engaging the community to be part of the discussions, to be part of the engagement, such that even as they do the allocations, the communities don't feel left out and they're part of the solutions.
Patrick, when you look at a country that you have mentioned and who one could say built the spiritual foundation on which this organization now runs, how have they dealt with rural-urban migration, and how have they dealt with the possibility of informal settlements coming up?
Yeah, it's such a fantastic question. This is a struggle. It goes without saying more than half the global population now is urban. And if I'm not mistaken, it's going to go up to as much as more than 60, close to 65%, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. It's a couple of things are happening. There is the housing equation that Anthony and I are talking about, but the other aspects that that's related to housing is just basic infrastructure services. Mm-hmm. The social infrastructure itself is weakening due to urbanization. By that I mean basic care, basic services, etc. It's a huge problem. One of the things that we haven't touched on thus far, but it's important even from a housing lens because it has absolute correlation to your question that you just raised about urbanization, is climate and climate change. The nexus between housing, migration, rural-urban migration, climate change is all having a bearing. And the learning for us as an organization whose posture is really predicated on learning is to say, we are not the experts in all this. We don't honestly have all the answers. But guess what we're going to do? We want to work with the experts. It's an invitation. The reason why Anthony and I are really doubling down on partnerships is because Habitat, again, based on a posture of learning and our experience, primarily working with communities, is we realize in the greater interest of the people we are called to serve, primarily our communities, it's in our best interest, whether it's working with governments, whether it's working with the private sector, but community-based organizations. Mm-hmm. You know, to your question, some of the best solutions actually reside within our communities, so how we engage is critical. But the other critical part is there are organizations that actually specialize. Like when I was here in Nairobi, I met with my colleagues. My colleagues and I met with the UN Environment Program for us to talk and ask them critical questions saying, can we actually work together because our agenda is pretty much the same when it comes to this particular issue around housing, as opposed to really having competing agendas.
You know, it's interesting. If you look at, say, for instance, the decision makers in our country, they all have rural homes.
Yeah.
And very many of them grew up in the rural areas. I guess the bulk of them grew up in the rural areas. Mm-hmm. So the sort of housing that you speak of in many rural homes was one room. Mm. And what they call semi-permanent.
Mm. Mm.
Now, when you come into town, and what you can afford is that one room, you're not really far removed from what you grew up seeing.
True.
So the mind to bring about what we're discussing meets resistance, not because someone doesn't want it, but you're not telling them, you're actually introducing them to a fairly strange concept. See, formal education doesn't quite remove your socialization from your system. I'm saying this because if I look at the amount of efforts that have been put into some of these things, and I look at what we like touting as Kenyans as a very well-educated population, and yet the efforts to bring about these changes are rather slow compared to the rhetoric of how well-knowledged we are. Speak.
You know, I somehow get the impression that you were part of some of our internal conversations over the past few days, because every question that you ask is pretty much based on what we are talking about. What you just said is what we call the cultural norms and changes that ought to happen hand in hand if we are to honestly be effective. So there's a mindset change that's required, and you brought up this issue between rural and urban, and I think the mindset is to say, can we just make this transition based on the old mindset? And we are saying, actually, even if you want to, that's going to be a challenge for you based on the challenges that we talked about. Because we are an organization that works very closely with communities, our own learning over the past few decades has been that it's okay sometimes to pause and say, maybe we need to actually invest more time listening and learning before we just jump to the solutions. And the reason I'm saying that again is because, look at us. Someone said to me when I was in South America just last year when we had a housing forum, this person had worked for the United Nations for about 25 years, he said, for the first time, I'm glad that the nexus between housing and climate is surfacing in a way that is never surfaced before, and thanked us. But quite frankly, shouldn't be thanking us. You know, we learned it from our communities. We learned it from our partners. So to your question, I would say the cultural change, the beauty of our global outlook whilst being still local, is that our communities have actually given us a platform to learn. And that is what we really want to build on. Again, no pun intended when I said build on.
Well, look at the time. It's coming up to 9 a.m. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Let me prepare my tongue to pronounce your name. Patrick Canagasingham is the Global COO at Habitat for Humanity International, whereas Anthony Stephen Okoth is the National Director at Habitat for Humanity Kenya. We have been having this conversation about decent and affordable housing, and at least we know one or two more. Thank you very much for joining us. Keep it here for more conversations.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.